Ladies and gentlemen, to lead the Pledge of Allegiance, please welcome U.S. Air Force retired Lieutenant Colonel Nick Rhodes.
My fellow Americans, please join with me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States flag of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty for all. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome City of Wilmington Mayor Pro Tem Margaret Haynes.
Well, good afternoon, Wilmington. What a great day for the city of Wilmington. I'm here to welcome you to this Hannah Block USO building in historic downtown Wilmington. As he said, I'm Margaret Haynes, and I'm honored to serve as the Mayor Pro Tem for the city of Wilmington. And I bring you greetings today from Mayor Sappho and the City Council. And I hope that you enjoy your time here in downtown Wilmington. And I challenge you, when this event is over, to take the 2-block walk just down to the river and enjoy the river walk. It runs from bridge to bridge, and you can have a great time watching the sunset from one of our terrific restaurants. And I guarantee you, it actually, factually, is the safest place in New Hanover County, downtown Wilmington. North Carolina is one of the most important battleground states this year. And we understand that, and isn't that exciting? It was among the closest of states in 2008, and we prevailed. But in 2012, it was really close, but we just barely missed the mark. So it's very exciting to see a strong level of commitment from Hillary Clinton in earning the support of North Carolina voters all across this state. The Clinton-Kaine campaign has opened some 30 offices across the state. That's a lot. And just a couple of weeks ago, we opened the field office here in Wilmington, and I know Elise Arthur and some other people are here, and it's really fun to get involved in a presidential campaign. So there are a lot of people here that would love to sign you up and have you participate. We've seen tremendous energy across North Carolina for Hillary Clinton and for Tim Kaine. And that includes Wilmington, but the rest of the state too. During those visits, and they will continue to do this, they discuss their plans on how to make the economy work for everyone, highlighting their proposal to make the biggest investment in job creation since World War II. And that means creating over 300,000 jobs right here in our state of North Carolina. I was born and raised in North Carolina, and I was taught to believe that government and politics are a good thing. Think about that for a minute. Government and politics are both good things. They are really the basis for civil society, and we have to reject the mantra of some that works to undermine people's confidence in government. We need good, qualified leaders that reflect our North Carolina values of hard work and caring about our fellow citizens. Hillary Clinton's message is resonating here in North Carolina more and more every day because it's about lifting people up. It's about building an economy that works for everyone, not just for those at the top of the pyramid, but it's about breaking down barriers for people from all walks of life and putting families first and recognizing that we are stronger together. We must as a country, we really have to, as a country, as a state, as a county, as a city, reject this divisiveness, name-calling, and mean-spiritedness. And we've got to pledge to work together to move this country forward in a positive and a productive way. And I'm here today to say to you, as a former Hillary Clinton delegate, and I was actually a Bill Clinton delegate too, I'm with her.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome North Carolina State Representative Susie Hamilton.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to District 18, North Carolina House of Representatives. How is everybody today? Well, you know, this is particularly thrilling for me to have been asked and invited to come up here and speak on behalf of not just the Democratic Party, but on behalf of this particular ticket with Hillary Clinton and Senator Tim Kaine. It's particularly humbling to me because I'm a woman that served in the North Carolina General Assembly over the last 6 years as a Democrat and in the minority for the last 6 years. It's been a real struggle. I've watched the Republican Party come through and slash public education. I've watched them challenge the right for every citizen in the United States of America to vote their conscience. And I've watched them bring LGBT legislation to pass that is discriminatory and cruel, and frankly, it's un-American. So I've got a thing or two to say. First of all, isn't it wonderful that North Carolina is a battleground state again? It's a battleground state again for the reasons I just mentioned before. 6 years of the Republican-led North Carolina General Assembly has set us back in job creation, public education, economic development, environmental issues. The list is long. And we hear all of these things in this campaign season about having raised teachers' salaries to $50,000. BS. I'm sorry, can I say that on TV? These are the teachers whose salaries will have to be supplemented by local taxpayer dollars. This is not coming from the state. If they're going to meet that $50,000 mark, they must be supplemented by local government. I, for one, don't want to see my property taxes go up any higher than they already have as a result of bad governing from the Republican Party. So we're going to fight that. We're going to continue to fight it. We're also going to make sure these teachers don't have to buy their own school books anymore and school supplies. I was speaking with a teacher the other day, and she let me know that they are using textbooks for their science classes at Broughton High School in Raleigh that are from 1998. 1998. It's pitiful, and it's inexcusable, and North Carolina won't stand for it anymore. So we are a battleground state, and it is very, very important that each and every one of you get out to vote this year. The polls look great for us, but we can't afford to take anything for granted. You must go to the polls, you must take 2 or 3 people with you to the polls, and we must take back our state of North Carolina. One other statistic that I want to share with you before we go. Generally speaking, the 6 counties in North Carolina that have university systems in within their county lines generally vote Democratic, but for 2. And that one of those, unfortunately, is New-Hanover-County. The other is, I believe, Watauga County. But we are so close every year on issues like gay marriage, where we only lost that vote in New-Hanover County by 180 votes. Where Kay Hagan was defeated by Senator Tom Tillis by only 80 votes. Not only is this a battleground state, New-Hanover County is a battleground county, and we need to fight for Hillary Rodham Clinton. We need to fight for Tim Kaine. We need to fight for this country, and we're going to take North Carolina back. Thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome candidate for North Carolina State Treasurer, Dan Blue III.
Good afternoon, Wilmington. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm Dan Blue, and I'm running to be your next state treasurer and to do my part to build a better state. And I'm part of a slate of candidates that are dedicated and committed to taking our state and our nation forward. And it's with that in mind that I'm proud to be here with you today and our featured guest, our next Vice President, Tim Kaine. Now, as I move around, I spend most of my time talking about the state's pension and its investments, its health plan, and funding its investment in infrastructure, whether that's roads, school buildings, or water treatment facilities. And I know that our speaker today knows a little bit about that because he's been a former mayor and a former governor. And as a former senator, as a current senator, he understands the future of retirement and the importance of investing in our country. And we need partners in D.C. like that and in the White House to help us build a better economy here in eastern North Carolina, not only on our beautiful coast and our coastal areas, but also in the middle, places like Kinston and Goldsboro and Ahoskie. But we're not here today to talk about economics. Senator Kaine, as a former mayor and as a governor, knows very well that we're talking about national security because we know that the challenges ahead require our nation to be strong here at home and across the globe. And I know, as I believe that you know, that experience, temperament, and judgment are the qualities that it will take in our next commander-in-chief, the qualities that we expect in a leader, because the decision to commit our most valuable assets, our people, to fight on foreign soils or defend us here is one of the most important decisions that a leader can make, and it's one that we cannot take lightly. We put them in harm's way, our soldiers. We separate them from their families. We remove them from their communities. And those decisions are not ones that we can take for granted. And Hillary Clinton, as our next president, she understands that. She served us as Secretary of State and helped our president navigate very treacherous waters. And she selected Tim Kaine to be her running mate because he understands that. Not only has he served our Senate well on the Armed Forces Committee, not only has he focused on making sure that the future of defense in America is a smarter defense, a better defense. Not only does he have a son serving in the Marines overseas, but he's here today to talk to us about how we build a safer North Carolina and a safer America and a stronger America, and how we do it together, all of us, each and every one of us, because we're stronger together and safer together. And I'm happy to be here with you to help him welcome Wilmington into the presidential campaign, into the race. And I hope you'll receive him as well as you've received all of us. Thank you very much, and I look forward to spending my time out there with you as I listen to this great man up here. Have a good afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome retired United States Marine Corps Lieutenant General John Castello.
There you go. Thank you all very much for being here at this important event. We're going to get to hear Senator Kaine talk about one of my favorite topics, and I think yours too, which is the security of this great nation of ours. I know you out in the audience have that near and dear to your heart because I spent 4 tours over 10 years at New River and Cherry Point. And I know that your friends, your neighbors, your family, those of you that were in church with you in the community were also Marines and sailors assigned there. And you know what a burden those men and women have been carrying, particularly over the last 15 years, and you're here to show your support, and I really appreciate that. Let me tell you, the threat is still there, and it ranges from those regional powers that would like to establish hegemony over their particular areas, those rogue nations that have nuclear weapons, those failed states that are incubators for non-state actors. Those are the threats that are going to continue for a generation, and we need to be prepared to deal with them. But how we've done it in the past has been a default, in many cases, to those men and women that are your neighbors and your family and up the road. What we need to do is make sure all the powers of this great nation are focused, whether it's economic, diplomatic, developmental, or even our cultural, in order to make no more the default to send those men and women to shed our most precious resource, which is their blood. So it's also about resourcing those military services and those people. It's about recruiting them, training them, equipping them, and after they go and serve and do what only 1/2% of this nation's citizens are willing to do, and that is serve in the military, that we take care of them as veterans as well. This election is about who we're going to put as a steady hand in our top leadership positions. I've served under every president since Nixon. I know what a steady hand at the controls is like. We have in aviation, and I was a helicopter pilot, a saying, no fast hands on the controls. What that means is you do the analysis, you think, and you don't just go by your gut reaction. What you do is you do the right thing the first time. You're a stable hand. Senator Kaine is going to join as a stable partner with Secretary Clinton to provide those stable hands on the controls. They know what it takes because of their experience. Senator Kaine is on the Armed Services Committee, on the Foreign Relations. He's been a governor. He knows what it takes to put together a leadership team that can support our nation, ensure that it's secure, and take care of those folks that are our primary line of defense. I think that the most important thing about Senator Kaine is that he is the father of one of those 1/2%, a Marine officer that's deployed now across the waters in our service to our great country. Senator Kaine.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Please have a seat. What a treat to be here in Wilmington. What a treat to be here at the Hannah Block USO building, which is a building that for so many years has provided such great service to our men and women in uniform, and especially to their families and friends. I want to thank General Castellaw for his kind introduction, but more especially for his service and for the service of all in this room who are connected with our nation's military. General Castellaw and I were chatting backstage, and he indicated that in a 36-year Marine career, he and his family, his wife and son, moved 25 times. So forget about just the challenges out there when confronting an enemy. Just being in the military and being a military family is about sacrifice and challenge, and I honor that in him. I honor that in Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes, who led us off with the Pledge of Allegiance. We heard from Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, and I had a chance to meet with Mayor Sappho of Wilmington a few minutes ago and visit with him. State Representative Susie Hamilton and Dan Blue, candidate for State Treasurer, and to all of you for coming. I'm so glad that we could be here today in Wilmington, a city that means a lot to me. I'm here to talk about national security, which is the most serious obligation of any president. This is a topic that I've immersed myself in for many, many years. When Hillary Clinton asked if I would serve as her running mate, she told me that a Clinton-Kaine administration's achievements would be measured by real differences we make in somebody's home or neighborhood or school or workplace. She told me that my governing experience as a city councilman and mayor, as a lieutenant governor and governor, and as a senator would help make sure that we measured our progress by tangible differences in people's lives. And she also told me that my expertise in national security would help her make sure, as the Commander-in-Chief, that America continues to lead the world in this most challenging century. As a mayor and governor, I was responsible for the safety of my citizens, for respecting our service members and military families, for supporting our Virginia Guard, which was deployed in 2 wars during my time as governor, and for taking care of our troops when they came home. Virginia is pretty similar to North Carolina. 1 out of every 10 Virginians is a veteran. Not 1 out of every 10 Virginia adults, 1 out of every 10 Virginians from birth to death is a veteran. In the Senate, I serve on both the Armed Services and Foreign Relations committees. I represent a state that has deep ties to our military, diplomatic, humanitarian, and intelligence efforts. I lived overseas in Honduras at a pivotal time in my life and saw from abroad the role that American leadership can play and our obligation to get it right. And now my oldest son, a proud Marine who's based nearby at Camp Lejeune, is deployed overseas for the 2nd time. So when it comes to American national security, I take this personally. Being president is the hardest job in the world. Every president needs a solid partner because no challenge that makes its way to the Oval Office is easy to solve. Harry Truman, a proud veteran, said it best, "The buck stops here." Every day a president deals with late-breaking challenges in a world of incomplete data and conflicting advice. We trust a president with the command of our armed forces and even with the codes to our nuclear weapons. The president has to assemble the right team, ask the right questions, process enormous quantities of information, and then make quick and resolute decisions. That's why it takes a very special person to sit behind that desk. Somebody with a steady demeanor, solid judgment, and it helps to have really thick skin. Now, let's be honest. This election has been pretty unusual. We're used to Republicans and Democrats arguing about policies and priorities. That's the way it ought to be. But within certain boundaries. I did not vote for John McCain, but I admired and still admire his service, his sacrifice, and his example. He's my committee chair on the Armed Services Committee. I didn't vote for Mitt Romney, but I have deep respect for his seriousness, his entrepreneurial energy, and his faith. The choice we face this year, especially on national security, is very different. On the one hand, we have the clear and consistent vision of Hillary Clinton, a proven leader with an even temperament and the qualifications equal to any candidate in our nation's history, who has not only served on the Armed Services Committee, but has also been the nation's chief diplomat. Over the course of this campaign, Hillary Clinton has laid out her core belief that the United States is an exemplary nation. She recognizes that we're not just a superpower because of our economic wealth or our military might. No, we're exemplary because of the example we set. For decades, America has championed values like liberty, decency, and compassion. We're not perfect, and we'll never be perfect. But there's a reason why people all over the world look to the United States, ask for our help in time of trouble, and follow our lead. On the other hand, we have divisive and dangerous rhetoric of an untested candidate, Donald Trump. Now, I don't need to twist or spin Donald Trump's words at all. Because once Americans hear his words just as he said them, they'll reach the same conclusion that national security leaders, Democrats, Republicans, and independents have reached. Donald Trump is unqualified and temperamentally unfit to serve as President of the United States and America's Commander-in-Chief. Donald Trump trash talks our own military and those who sacrifice for it, including John McCain, an American hero and POW. He picked a fight with a Virginia Gold Star family whose son died saving his fellow soldiers. He has a bizarre fascination with strong men and authoritarian leaders in countries that are no allies of the United States. And with respect to our allies, he would toss alliances aside and says he wants to, quote, take everything back from the world that we've given to them. Trump has offered empty promises and divisive rhetoric. Under his leadership, we would be unrecognizable to the rest of the world, and we would be far less safe. I want to compare Hillary Clinton's views to Donald Trump by looking at three areas of the world. Let's start by looking at the Middle East. Hillary Clinton understands that our security depends on finding ways to address a rising tide of extremism across this wide arc of instability. Working with allies to defeat ISIS, countering Iran's continued aggression, and defending the State of Israel. In a region that's fraught with challenges, there's no substitute for building strong relationships. That's why I've helped lead congressional delegations to Turkey, Kuwait, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. During 3 trips to Turkey, I've met with government officials, U.S. troops, civil society, and religious groups to talk about the threats posed by ISIS. We visited a city not far from the Syrian border, ISIS-controlled territory, and met with Syrian refugees. And over the course of 5 trips to Israel, I've discussed everything from missile defense to human rights to economic cooperation. Now, meetings and experiences like these on the ground and in the room give you essential knowledge about the people and places that impact the safety of America. Hillary has that. She's been sitting across those tables for years. And Hillary's on a first-name basis with virtually every head of state in the region. That's one reason she was able to facilitate a ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas and twist enough arms to put sanctions in place on Iran, leading then to a diplomatic breakthrough on Iran's nuclear program. And it's how she's put forward serious plans to defeat ISIS, enforce the Iranian nuclear agreement, and ensure that Israel's future as a democratic and Jewish state is secure. Donald Trump doesn't have credible plans for these challenges. Apparently, he doesn't have a lot of use for real-world experiences, or he says most of his knowledge comes from reality TV. He says he, quotes, gets his insight from, quote, the shows on cable news. He may claim to know it all, but on Middle East policy, he's been all over the map. There's only one thing that's consistent: how dangerous his ideas and rhetoric really are. Let's look at Iraq. In Trump's first campaign speech, he claimed that he'd had the foresight to say, quote, "Don't hit Iraq because you're going to completely destabilize the Middle East." That's what he said. He said back in 2001, 2002. It's one of the main rationales for his candidacy, and it's completely made up. Donald Trump was clearly in favor of the war in Iraq. In 2000, well before the invasion, he said, quote, "If we decide against a strike against Iraq is necessary, it's madness not to carry the mission to its conclusion." In 2002, Trump told national security expert Howard Stern that he was still in favor of going into Iraq. In 2003, he said that the war looked like it had been, quote, "a tremendous success." And in 2004, given the information that President Bush had, he might have made the same decision to invade. Now, these days, he rails against the decisions to pull troops out of Iraq, a decision set in motion by the Bush administration, claiming that that decision led to the creation of ISIS. But folks, here's the problem. In 2006, Trump said we weren't pulling our troops out of Iraq fast enough. He said we should, quote, "get out of Iraq as quickly as possible." There's no escaping these facts. Donald Trump has misled the American people over and over about his position on Iraq. He was for evading Iraq, and then he decided he wasn't. He was for leaving Iraq, and then he decided he wasn't. He says whatever he feels like at any given time, because you can do that when you're a TV star. But you can't do that when you're the President of the United States. He's doing the same thing with Libya. Nowadays, Trump says he was never in favor of taking action there. At a GOP debate, he made the incredible claim that he had never even discussed the subject in public. Trump is misleading us here, too. Back in 2011, when the U.S. was weighing whether to intervene in Libya, Trump said that because its leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was killing thousands of his own people, America had to act. He went on NBC, and he said that if he were president, he'd create a militarily imposed no-fly zone to protect innocent Libyans. Now, if that sounds a lot like the policy that President Obama and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State supported, that's because it is the policy that President Obama and Hillary Clinton supported. Except instead of playing an armchair general on the Today Show, Hillary was in Paris engaging in furious round-the-clock diplomacy with the G8, with the Arab League, and with representatives of the Libyan transitional government to put that no-fly zone in place. Her relentless efforts led to a UN resolution, a coalition air campaign that saw zero loss of American lives, and that ended Gaddafi's slaughter of innocent people. It sounds like Trump should have been pretty pleased with that outcome, right? Nope. Donald Trump apparently now thinks, quote, "we would be so much better off," close quote, "if Gaddafi were still in charge of Libya." And yet, by Trump's own admission, Gaddafi was a man who, again, quote, "knocked a Pan Am airplane out of the sky. This is not a good man. This is not a sane man." But Gaddafi was a man who Donald was happy to do business with. Not to put too fine a point on this, but just 2 years before 2011, when Muammar Gaddafi was set to visit the United Nations, and no one would let him stay in New York, Trump allowed Gaddafi to set up an elaborate tent at his Westchester County estate. That's right, when Gaddafi was looking for a place to stay in America, and because of his human rights track record and the Pan Am bombing, others were turning him away, he found one guy who was willing to host him, Donald J. Trump. You were saying something about judgment, Donald? Let's look at Iran. Thanks in part to global sanctions, a global sanctions coalition that Hillary Clinton assembled, President Obama ultimately achieved a historic agreement that put a lid on Iran's nuclear program without firing a single shot. I worked hard on this in Congress out of a belief that we have to exhaust diplomacy. We have to, before we contemplate other alternatives. I worked across the aisle with the Republican chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Republican Senator Bob Corker, to craft a bill that set up a constructive process for congressional review of an Iran deal. That process ultimately improved the deal by strengthening our hand in negotiations instead of undercutting it through partisan politics. But we have no idea how Donald Trump would handle Iran, and frankly, neither does he. To try to figure out what his plan would be about Iran, conservative talk show host Yu Hewitt asked him how he would deal with the Quds Force, which is the aggressive Iranian military units that actively undermine our interests in Iraq and Syria. Trump replied that the Kurds have been horribly mistreated. He talked about the Kurds because he had no idea what the Quds Force was, and that the Kurds and the Quds Force could not be more different. In the same interview, Trump couldn't tell the difference between Hezbollah and Hamas either. But don't worry, he said, eventually, quote, I will know more about it than you do, and believe me, it won't take long. I wonder how much comfort our Israeli ally would find in that promise, or in other ideas he's had, like Donald's desire to be a, quote, neutral guy when it comes to the peace process, as if you could be neutral about the desire for peace, or to make Israel pay for the defense aid that we provided. Israel is our strongest partner in the region, facing renewed wave of terror attacks, and in an area where both ISIS and Iran pose daily threats, and Trump's plan was to pat them on the back and tell them good luck. That's no way to treat an ally. That's no way to treat a friend. When it comes to ISIS, Hillary and I have a smart and credible plan. We'll intensify our strikes on their strongholds in Iraq and Syria. That is already shrinking the real estate that ISIS controls in the region. And Hillary and I both believe that Congress should finally do its job and take a vote on whether the American military should be using force for now over 2 years against ISIS. We will keep pursuing diplomacy to end the conflict so that are fueling ISIS's expansion. We'll launch an intelligence surge and ensure that we're coordinating with our allies how to dismantle ISIS's global networks. And we'll harden our defenses here at home. Trump doesn't think our military is up to the task, or America is up to the task of stopping ISIS. He has literally said, quote, we can't beat them. He has more than once called our armed forces, quote, a disaster. He says that the armed forces of the United States are, quote, in shambles, that they're, quote, going to hell. I don't know how anybody who's met with our men and women in uniform could think that, much less say it. As a military father, Donald Trump's disrespect for our military absolutely infuriates me. And when I hear him say, I'll be, quote, the best with the vets, I have to wonder how a guy who stiffs veterans' charities and who brags openly about avoiding paying taxes, I have to wonder how that guy will ever be somebody you can count to stand up for vets. Trump says he knows more, quote, than the generals do. Knows more than the generals do. Though I bet most of the generals knew that ISIS is led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. In more than one interview, Donald wasn't up to speed on that important fact. A sad fact is groups like ISIS are actually kind of rooting for Trump. A recent article in Foreign Affairs actually interviewed a number of jihadists, and many of them are hoping for Trump to succeed in the campaign. They've even put out recruitment videos featuring him, since Donald Trump's talk of this un-American banning of all Muslims plays right into their hands for propaganda purposes. Now, Donald Trump has famously said that his plan to defeat ISIS is secret, but it's a secret he's glad to talk about frequently. He has said, for example, it's simple, just bomb the oil fields and take the oil. Bomb the oil fields and take the oil. Well, let's play that one out. If we bomb oil fields, it will create massive fires. Okay, so then we would have to do something to put out fires. That would involve sending in an awful lot of contractors and others to put out fires. And since there's a civil war going on, if we put in contractors and others to put out fires, we'd have to put in a lot of troops to protect them in putting out the fires. And that doesn't even take into account the pipelines and refineries that we'd have to either build or take over, or the other problems concerning every aspect of his plan after the first day. That just doesn't interest him. Now, at other times, Trump talks about disengaging and letting Syria become, quote, a free zone for ISIS. And sometimes he talks about dramatically increasing the use of American ground troops in Syria and Iraq. And sometimes he's even mused about using nuclear weapons against ISIS, which would cause massive civilian casualties. You know this. The power to authorize the use of nuclear weapons requires a profound understanding of our long-standing posture of deterrence. For decades, the nuclear triad of subs, ICBMs, and strategic bombers has formed a three-part structure of our defense and our readiness. When Trump was asked about the nuclear triad, it was clear he had never heard of it. But he made sure to say that he loves nuclear weapons because, quote, the power, the devastation is very important to me. And for some reason, he thinks we should let more countries obtain nuclear weapons. When Trump was asked about his loose talk about using nuclear weapons, he asked, quote, then why are we making them, close quote. If this were the only blunder he'd made in the campaign, it would be disqualifying on its own. Hillary Clinton doesn't need a crash course in Nukes 101. She not only understands nuclear weapons, she helped cement an agreement with Russia that made the world safer from nuclear weapons. And as president, she has a plan to protect us from nuclear terrorism, to further reduce the chance that these weapons will fall into wrong hands. Second part of the world, let's talk about Russia and Europe. Hillary oversaw hard-nosed negotiations with the Russians for a New START treaty to greatly reduce our country's nuclear stockpiles. The treaty proved that it was still possible for our nations to find common ground on some important points, and there have been others. The destruction of the Syrian chemical weapons stockpile, for example. But that can't blind us to the fact that in so many areas Russia continues to be a very challenging adversary. Hillary has gone toe-to-toe with Putin. As Secretary of State, she worked to strengthen our military cooperation with NATO and Eastern Europe. Putin even accused Hillary Clinton of helping democratic opposition movements within Russia. And now Hillary has a plan to support our allies, to weaken the Kremlin's hand, and to advance America's long-standing commitment to a Europe that is free, whole, and at peace. Because a strong European partner is always in American interest. We have hundreds of thousands of Americans who live in Europe, hundreds of thousands or millions who visit Europe, and tens of thousands of American troops who are deployed to Europe. A strong Europe is in America's interest. That's not what Donald Trump wants. So maybe it's no surprise why Russia seems to be backing Trump in this election. But the better question is why Trump seems to support Russian interests at the expense of American ones. Here's what we know, just the evidence. One of Donald Trump's sons said, quote, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate part of the Trump organization's assets, and, quote, we see a lot of money pouring in from Russia, close quote. Recent investigations revealed that Trump's been pursuing deals with Russian officials, oligarchs, and developers with deep ties to Russia since the late 1980s. A Putin associate paid him millions to bring the Miss Universe pageant to Moscow. As long as Donald Trump keeps hiding his tax returns, we have no idea how he might stand to profit from these deals with Russian interests or what they might be holding over him. But something strange is clearly going on. Trump's longtime advisor and campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, resigned recently after allegations of corruption illegal payments and financial ties to Kremlin-supported officials and organizations in both Russia and the Ukraine. His longtime advisor and campaign chairperson. His go-to defense advisor, General Michael Flynn, appears regularly on Russia's government-funded propaganda channel. Donald Trump has publicly encouraged Russia to hack America and give him information that will help him win the election. No wonder the former acting CIA director, Michael Morrell, says he believes that Trump is a, quote, unwitting agent, close quote, of the Russian Federation. Now, this isn't a partisan issue. There's widespread alarm on both sides of the aisle. Foreign policy experts, including many Republicans, wrote an open letter denouncing Trump's views on Russia and NATO, and it's why more than 50 prominent Republican foreign policy experts have said they cannot vote for Donald Trump under any circumstances. These experts know that Vladimir Putin's longstanding goal is to break the post-war international order that has kept peace in Europe, for decades. So they don't understand why Trump is calling NATO obsolete and talking about abandoning our allies, or why his campaign weakened the Republican Party platform's commitment to defending Ukraine, or why he claimed Russia would never go into Ukraine 2 years after Putin had already invaded the country and annexed the Crimean Peninsula, or why he's openly celebrating the United Kingdom's vote to leave the EU, even though it emboldens Russia and could lead to a more fractured Europe, or why he's openly encouraged Russia to hack his political opponents and commit espionage against his own country. Each one of these positions stands in stark opposition to decades of American national security goals, but they match up perfectly with Vladimir Putin's wish list. It has to make you wonder. Hillary Clinton has proven she can work with Putin if it's in America's interest, but she's ready to stand up to him too when he is taking steps that are against our interest. And she'll make sure that our allies across Europe and around the world never have to wonder about whether America will honor our longstanding commitments. When she's president, we'll have their backs because we need them to have ours. In the NATO treaty, there's an obligation to do collective self-defense. If one NATO ally is attacked, others come to the defense. And Donald says that may be archaic and he wants to dispose of it. The only time that collective self-defense obligation has been triggered was after the United States was attacked on 9/11 and our European NATO allies came to our aid. So what does it say to NATO allies that a presidential candidate is saying, well, now it may be time for us to tear up that defense obligation? Finally, let's take a look at a third part of the world, Latin America. As Hillary has said, we look east and west, but too often we forget to look south, even though our own hemisphere is so critical to our security and prosperity. A Clinton Kaine administration would engage with the flourishing democracies in Latin America, not wall ourselves off. We've got to work with our neighbors to address issues like drug trafficking, crime, and poverty. We need strong, principled American leadership, because if we don't step up, others will. And if we do step up, our partnerships in this hemisphere can be a powerful advantage to us at home and in the world, not only in national security, but economically as well. I have a special connection to Latin America. I worked with Jesuit missionaries in El Progreso, Honduras 35 years ago. I learned Spanish and then taught kids carpentry and welding. I didn't teach Spanish. My Spanish wasn't good enough to teach that, but I taught carpentry and welding, and I got an up-close look at a dictatorship, a military dictatorship where few had the power and everybody else was left behind. That experience in Honduras and the friendships I formed there inspired me to devote my life to expanding opportunity for everybody. Last year I returned to the region, this time as a U.S. Senator. I worked with leaders and lawmakers to strengthen the economic and security ties between our nations. In Colombia, I met with President Santos to discuss the Colombia-FARC peace talks, which recently resulted in a historic peace deal just within the last month. And in Honduras, I met with President Hernandez to discuss security issues like how to combat gang violence so that young people don't need to flee their country to come to the United States just to be safe. Now, these weren't quick drop-bys or photo ops. These were real, substantive working meetings with heads of state. And when we had disagreements, we weren't afraid to air them. That's how you know whether a friendship is a friendship. No friendship or alliance is tested until you have a disagreement and you air the disagreement and you see what you can work out. Compare that to Trump's embarrassing stunt last week. The centerpiece of Donald Trump's campaign is building a wall and making Mexico pay for it. That's the centerpiece of the campaign. It's even a chant at his rallies. Yet when Donald Trump decided to do his first visit with a foreign leader, and he